The men kneeling on the floor had once sold him as a slave. They had no idea. They had traveled hundreds of miles. They were starving, desperate, and now they were bowing before the most powerful man in Egypt, begging for grain, begging for their lives. They did not look up. They did not dare. And the man on the throne said nothing. He watched them. He studied their faces, their voices, their fear, and he recognized every single one of them. He knew exactly who they were, where they were from, what they had done. But he said nothing. Why? The men kneeling before him had destroyed his life. He had the power to destroy theirs. He had the authority, the army, the law of an entire empire behind him. 2 words, and it would all be over. But he didn't say them. Why didn't he tell them who he was? That question is the heart of one of the most extraordinary stories ever recorded, and the answer will change how you understand betrayal, suffering, power, and what it actually means to forgive. To understand what happened in that throne room, you have to understand what happened in a field decades earlier. Jacob had 12 sons, but everyone knew he had one favorite, Joseph, the boy with the dreams, the boy with the coat, the boy whose father couldn't hide what he felt and didn't try. And his brothers watched for years. Every gesture of favoritism, every gift, every moment their father's eyes lit up for someone else. Until the day Joseph came to find them in the field, sent by their father to check on them, and they saw him coming from a distance, and something that had been building for years finally broke. They threw him into a pit. They sat down to eat while he cried out below them, and then they sold him, 20 pieces of silver, to merchants heading to Egypt. The man who proposed the sale, who said it was better to sell him than to kill him, was named Judah. Remember that name. They took Joseph's coat. They killed a goat. They covered the coat in blood, and they brought it to their father. Jacob recognized it immediately, and he wept for a son he believed was dead, while that son was already in chains, heading south, Egypt. Joseph arrived as a slave. He was purchased by a man named Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials. And here is what the text says. Not that Joseph accepted his fate, not that Joseph made the best of a bad situation. The text says, "The Lord was with Joseph." In the house of the man who owned him, Joseph rose. He became trusted, responsible. Potiphar placed everything he had under Joseph's authority, until Potiphar's wife wanted something Joseph would not give her. And when he refused, she accused him of the very thing he had refused to do. And Potiphar believed her. Joseph went to prison, and the text says it again. The Lord was with Joseph. Not after the suffering, not once things improved, during it. While he was in a cell he had done nothing to deserve, the same phrase. The Lord was with Joseph, which means everything that was happening to him, the pit, the chains, the false accusation, the prison, was not the end of a story. It was the path through one. 2 years passed in that prison. Then Pharaoh dreamed. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin ones, 7 full heads of grain swallowed by 7 withered ones. And no one in Egypt could explain it, until someone remembered a Hebrew prisoner who interpreted dreams. Joseph was brought from the cell. He stood before the most powerful man in the world, and he told Pharaoh exactly what the dreams meant. 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. And then he told Pharaoh what to do about it. Pharaoh looked at the man standing before him, a prisoner, a foreigner, a slave, and said something that changed everything. Can we find anyone like this man? One in whom is the Spirit of God? In a single day, Joseph went from a prison cell to the second throne in Egypt. The man his brothers had sold for 20 pieces of silver was now the man the entire world would need to survive. Every nation was coming to Egypt for grain, and Joseph was the one who controlled it. He was 30 years old, 13 years after the pit. The famine reached every corner of the known world, and Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain, 10 of them. He kept the youngest, Benjamin, at home. They arrived. They entered the throne room, and they bowed to the ground before the governor of Egypt. Joseph saw them the moment they walked in. He knew them immediately, and he said nothing. He spoke through an interpreter, as if he didn't understand their language. He studied their faces, counted them, and asked, "Where do you come from?" He already knew. Then he accused them of being spies. They denied it. They explained themselves, 12 brothers, one gone, the youngest at home with their father. Joseph listened, and then he made his decision. He put them in custody for 3 days. On the 3rd day, he told them his terms. One brother would stay. The others would go back with grain. But they had to return with the youngest brother. As they spoke among themselves, not knowing Joseph could understand every word, they said something he had waited 13 years to hear. "We are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen." They still remembered. After 13 years, they still carried it. Joseph turned away from them and wept. Then he composed himself, came back, and took Simeon and bound him before their eyes. The test had begun, but it wasn't finished. The brothers returned home. They told Jacob everything, and Jacob refused to send Benjamin. Months passed. The famine deepened, and eventually there was no choice. Judah stood before his father, the same Judah who had proposed the sale decades ago, and he made a promise Jacob had never heard from any of his sons. "I will be responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you all my life." They returned to Egypt with Benjamin. Joseph saw his youngest brother, his mother's other son, and had to leave the room. He went to his private chamber and wept. Then he washed his face and came back. He sat them at his table. He arranged them in birth order, a detail that stunned them. How could he know? He gave Benjamin 5 times more food than the others, and he watched. Then he did one final thing. He hid his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. He sent them away, and then sent his men after them. The cup was found, and the verdict was delivered. Benjamin would stay in Egypt as a slave. The others were free to go. And that is when Judah stepped forward. Judah spoke. He told the governor about their father, about how Jacob had already lost one son, about how losing Benjamin would kill him. And then Judah said the words that broke 20 years of silence. "Now then, please let your servant remain here as your slave in place of the boy. Let the boy return with his brothers." The man who had sold Joseph was now offering himself to save his brother. Joseph could not hold himself together any longer. He ordered everyone out of the room. Only his brothers remained. And then he wept so loudly that the Egyptians outside heard it. When he finally spoke, 2 words: "I am Joseph." No one moved. No one spoke. The room had just become 20 years younger. His brothers could not answer. They were terrified. Joseph spoke again. "Come close to me." And then he said the sentence that reframes everything. "You sold me here, but it was God who sent me." Not you, God. The pit the chains, the false accusation, the prison, the 2 forgotten years. All of it, not a series of disasters, a path, one that no one could have designed except the one who could see where it was going. Joseph was not diminishing what they had done. He was placing it inside something larger than their cruelty and larger than his pain. It was not you who sent me here, but God. And then, through everything, through the silence and the tests and the tears, came the only question Joseph had really wanted to ask. Is my father still alive? Why didn't Joseph tell them who he was? Because he needed to know something first, not whether they regretted what they had done, not whether they had suffered for it. He needed to know whether they were still the men who had thrown him in that pit, or whether time and guilt and consequence had made them into someone else. And when Judah, the man who had sold him, offered his own freedom to protect his brother, Joseph had his answer. The test was over, not because Joseph had forgiven them in a moment of weakness, but because he had seen something in that room that made forgiveness possible. Men who were willing to become what they should have been, 20 years too late, but not too late. The pit couldn't hold him. Slavery couldn't stop him. Prison couldn't silence him. And 20 years of betrayal couldn't change what he was. The pit they dug became the road that saved them.